Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Redesigned Sports, and today we're taking a look at the all-new, completely redesigned Altra Torin 7 and comparing it to last year's version, the Torin 6, to see what changed. Let's run with that. Before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Redesigned Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video. This final synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Let's do this. And because we're taking a look at Altra running shoes, and Altra does things a little bit differently compared to most other running shoe brands, I'll give you a quick breakdown. The first thing that Altra does differently is they have a 0mm heel to toe drop on all of their shoes, which means the heel is level with the forefoot. Most running shoe brands have anywhere between like a 5 to 12mm heel to toe drop, so heel is a little bit elevated on most classic traditional running shoes. Where again, in the Altra case, it's perfectly, as they call it, balanced, where the heel is a level with the forefoot for a zero drop. Altra is also known for their wide toe boxes. They call this their foot shape approach. Basically, you just have a bit more volume to the top of the shoe, which allows your toes to splay out once they hit the ground. Now, they have three different foot shapes. They have a slim foot shape, which is primarily found on their race day shoes or faster shoes. Then they have their standard foot shape, which we see here on the Torin 7. And they also have their original foot shape, which is their widest shaped toe box shaped shoe. And we see that on the Lone Peak 7, which I think is like their most popular trail running shoe that they've ever produced. The Torin 7 is Altra's max cushion neutral road running daily trainer designed to handle a wide variety of runs. And if you do like that kind of max cushion feel but want a little bit of stability, they also have the Paradigm, which is going to be updated here soon, but this basically has some guide rails on both sides to give you a little bit more support. So essentially, the Torin is the neutral workhorse daily trainer, while the Paradigm is the stability workhorse daily trainer for Altra. The Torin 7 costs $150, and they made it larger. It now has 2 more millimeters of stack height, giving us 30mm in the heel and 30mm in the forefoot for, again, that 0mm heel to toe drop. And even though it got larger, it got slightly lighter. It's now 9.8 ounces compared to the 9.9 we saw last year on the Torin 6. The upper has been redesigned, but still features the same type of engineered mesh material. I really liked it on the 6, and I continue to like it here on the 7. It doesn't stretch, keeps your foot locked in place, and is fairly breathable. And I did find the new Torin 7 to fit true to size. And like I mentioned before in the video, we do have the standard foot shape, which is kind of the middle of the road for Altra. It's not as wide as the Lone Peak with its original fit, but I did find it to have ample room for my toes and has a very similar fit to the previous Torin 6. And even though the foot shapes are the same, they did make some awesome adjustments. The first thing is the lacing system is a bit wider, which kind of helps with the customization of the fit. I had a little bit of bunching on the Torin 6. I felt the lacing system was just a bit too narrow, and they widened that up, especially at the base, which I think just helped with the overall configuration. And the other big thing is the tongue is now improved. I know the Torin 5 was horrendous. The 6 had this little felt piece at the top, which is fine, but I did find the edges of the tongue would kind of fold under themselves occasionally. And now they finally made a solid tongue that doesn't have any issues. The top of the tongue, perfectly normal, plenty of padding, has a little foam block at the top to help with waist pressure, and I'd say a minimal amount of padding to the rest of the tongue. And the most important thing too is, even though it's not gusseted, I wish they would just gusset their tongues. Altra doesn't like to do that for some reason. There's no folding on the edges like I had last time on the Torin 6. And then one other small note, the Torin 6 had this internal midfoot cage, and that would always kind of like roll in on itself too, and that would drive me nuts. I actually cut it out of my Torin 6 because it was kind of driving me nuts. I thought it was a tongue initially, but then when I was looking in the shoe, I was like, oh, there's a small piece of fabric on the Torin 6, and I got rid of that, and they decided to get rid of it too here on the Torin 7. So the update here on the upper, same material, same foot shape, kind of has that same fit, but the overall lockdown and kind of consistency in the feeling of the tongue, and there's no internal midfoot cage this year, feels much better, feels much more streamlined and just more simple, kind of like just more traditional upper, which I'm happy to see here on this new Torin 7. Moving to the back of the shoe, they did alter the heel counter just a tiny bit. It's now slightly wider. I felt the lockdown was solid. It was great on the 6, and I think continues to be really good here on the 7. Last year I had a little bit of ankle rubbing, I just think because it was a little bit too narrow, a bit too aggressive, and that issue no longer exists here on the 7. So through and through, much better upper experience. I really like the upper material. I said that last year, and I'm happy to see they kept it on the 7, and then they just changed the lacing system, the tongue, no more midfoot cage, and made the heel counters a bit more comfortable. So overall, some solid improvements to the upper that I think people will actually like. Both midsoles are made out of EgoMax foam. However, they feel completely different. A big reason for that is they reformulated the EgoMax foam on the 7 to be lighter. They gave it 2 more millimeters of stack height, yet I think they probably wanted it to be about the same weight or less. So they basically changed up the formulation of that EgoMax foam, and it does provide a different experience. In my opinion, it just feels a little bit less dense. It's not as soft and bouncy, and I can say that because the Paradigm 6 has a similar level of stack height with also EgoMax foam, but the older version. So yes, the Paradigm is heavier, but in my mind, it's a bit softer and bouncier. And I was kind of hoping for that softer, bouncier feeling here on the Torin 7. So it kind of comes down to what you prefer. If you rather have a lighter shoe, I think the new updated Torin 7 will kind of be up your alley. However, if you're kind of a fan of that older, softer, maybe bouncier EgoMax foam, but we're okay with the weight gain, you might be a little bit more disappointed. So it's a different change. I will say don't expect the same EgoMax. It's just going to be a little bit thicker underfoot with just a little bit less kind of squish and bounce to it because, in my opinion, I'm guessing here, they made the foam less dense to help kind of keep that weight down while increasing the overall stack height. I will say with its larger midsole, the Torin 7 finally feels like a true max cushion daily trainer, especially compared to all the other thick, well-cushioned shoes coming out now. And because the midsole is larger, there is no ground feel whatsoever, and it's a bit more stiff and rigid compared to its predecessor. A couple other small things I noticed about the midsole is they added these mini foam sidewalls towards the back of the lateral and medial side. Kind of hugs your foot and helps the overall stability. I think this is a nice add, especially for someone who wants a little bit of guidance. And while this is not a stability shoe, I will say it's a rather stable, neutral option. The other thing that they changed is the toe spring. You have a bit more curvature towards the front, kind of giving it a mini rocker effect. It's not super noticeable, but I will say it is more noticeable compared to last year. And I think the reason for that is the midsole got a little bit larger and just have a bit more to kind of wrangle in. And it seems to be Altra also likes this new rocker geometry. You see it very aggressively on the Via Olympus. And I think they kind of implemented maybe a smaller version here on the Torin 7 while still keeping that 0 millimeter heel to toe drop just because of how they measure it in the heel and then directly kind of under the ball of your foot. Moving on to the outsole, we have a similar design, although they did kind of move some things around. They removed some rubber from the heel section, and I will say I think the overall lug pattern is just a little bit thicker here on the 7 for some added durability. So overall, the Torin 7 with its complete redesign, I think nails the upper. They kind of addressed all the issues and finally got it right this year. The tongue, no issues. Upper, no issues. No midfoot cage. Heel counter doesn't rub and I think has a solid lockdown. And as far as the midsole goes, it provides a completely different experience compared to last year, especially because it has 2 more millimeters of stack height and a reformulated version of EgoMax, which is lighter but a little bit less dense and bouncy, especially when compared to something like the Paradigm 6. So overall, if you're someone who wanted a thicker, kind of more traditional feeling Torin, you might like this update. And I will say they kind of killed it with the upper. I'm happy, no kind of aches, pains, gripes about it. And the tongue has no issues, finally. So I think it's a nice update and change here. And if you're someone who wants, stability, check out the Paradigm. It's basically the stability version of the Torin. And I think the update will be coming out shortly here later in the summer of 2023. So let me know down in the comments, what do you think of this complete redesign? What do you think of the thicker Torin? Do you like this direction that Altra is going? I would love to hear from you. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.